Hello and welcome back. I am Robyn with Robyn Scherer Photography, and I am here today to share with you information using the radial gradient and the linear gradient. So we're going to use this image and we'll get started. So I will go ahead and let me move over to a different image here. I'm going to go ahead and reset this image. And I normally use my preset, and then I will definitely use the dropper to check the white balance, and normally I do like a warmer image, so I will warm that up. And this is the cropping tool. I normally crop to an 8x10. I am going to use the rule of thirds. So if you're using the rule of thirds, you usually want the lines, for example, in this image on the horizon, so that'll be one line. And on the subject, I will bring it in just a hair so that it's on her. And that's where you're guiding the viewer's eye. And I have the line up here just below the horizon, which it works. You want it pretty close. And I will hit enter, and that will set the image. So let's start with the linear gradient. So if I do the backslash button, that will show you the before image. And you can see there's some clouds back here. So if you undershoot a little bit, that gives you some wiggle room to reclaim what you lost undershooting, or it lets you bring it back when you're in post-processing. So clicking the masking button, I'm going to choose the linear gradient. And I'm going to pull it down from the top, as the sky is where I want it to make an impact. So as you drag it down, this point is pretty much the halfway mark, 50%. So as you go towards the top, you're going to get 100% up here of the gradient, moving to 50%, moving to no effect at all. And then you can move these lines, and you can have the entire gradient be a bigger range or a smaller range. So I'm going to leave that at the top. I'm going to bring the bottom up just a hair. And now it's masked off here. If you uncheck show overlay, that will take the red off. So I'm going to leave it on for a minute. It shows me exactly where my sliders are going to take effect. So I'm going to take the exposure down. And now the overlay comes off and you can see. So if you do an extreme example, it shows you what's happening. So I'm going to go back a little, obviously. Take it down just a hair. I'm going to bring the contrast down, the highlights down, the shadows. I'm going to lift the shadows a little bit and take the whites down a bit. And I'm going to lift the blacks. So what I also want to do in this area is, if you use the dehaze and you raise it, you can see the effect. So you don't want to go crazy. But if you raise it a little bit, it gives you a little bit more of an effect. And then I'm also going to raise the saturation. And in this area, if you look at the before, you have some blue, some pinks. Hit the backslash again. I'm definitely going to raise the tint to a little bit more pink and lower the temperature. That gives you a little bit more blue and pink, and lower the exposure a little bit more. So now we're getting a little bit more of a sky. You can also use texture and clarity to give you some definition. So I'm going to leave it right there for a moment. And now I'm going to zoom in and check her skin tone. So I'm going to grab the dropper, double check her skin tone. So for me, her skin tone is off. You want 85, 65, 55, and we're off. So I'm going to bring the exposure down up a little bit here. That's going to let me back up a little bit. Raising the exposure is going to raise it on the entire image. So if I lower it, you get some more of the color back. So if you do the masking and you choose select subject, so we're going a little bit deeper than the linear gradient on this one. So I've chosen the subject. If I raise the exposure a little bit on her, and then we can go in and check her skin tone. So honestly, we're still a little bit off. So I'm going to raise the luminance because that's also a great skin tone adjustment. And go back to before. And I'm going to zoom in and check her skin tone again here. So now we're almost spot on. For this young lady, her numbers, the RGB at the bottom of that target, should be 85, 78, 68. However, you can be a point within those. So 87, 78, 65 is great with me. I think her skin tone looks creamy. I will leave it there. So before, after. And this just kind of gives it my artistic touch. It's not drastically different. You haven't made a completely different photo. You get a little bit of the sky, which I like, and that's due to the the linear gradient. So you can use the radial gradient now. So we'll use that for something. So first off, it's back in the masking area. Grab new mask, hit radial. We'll just do something crazy. So let's say we're going to make a vignette all around her. So when you make the radial gradient, this center spot is, you can move it all around. I'm going to put it right on her. Now, let's start moving the sliders and you can see how it affects her. So it's going to make her very bright. So I'm going to put it back. So double clicking will put it back to, or reset it, put it back to 0. And now if you go up here and you click invert, invert will make the effect take place outside of her. So now we can see what happens. If we start to isolate her by bringing the effect in towards her. So now the focus is going towards her because it's more of a darker circle around. You can also raise the contrast, bring down the highlights, bring down the shadows and the whites. And so here's the before. And now you can see how doing that radial really zooms in on her. So that's one way of using the radial filter. So I'm actually going to delete it. So I'm just going to click this button, which is the radial filter, and delete. And now it's gone. So if we want to do it again, you'll say mask 3, add radial filter. So you bring it, let's say, around her face. Now you want to reset the sliders here. So let's reset. You're going to double click what you've clicked before. Now we're back to 0. Now you're going to work on the inside of the circle. So the invert is not checked. So now we're going to go on the inside. Or you can go and make her brighter and bring up the highlights and the shadows. Now, to make that really take effect, you would take the exposure down on the entire image, before, after. So she's a little bit brighter. So if you go back to your masks and you click it and you click on her, you can bring your exposure up more. And you can see how it affects her. So that's another way. I'm going to delete that. So it's another way you can use the mask. And I'm going to bring the exposure up on the image. So you've used your linear gradient and your radial gradient. Now, I will say another way you can use the radial gradient is, I believe I have a sunshot photo in here. You can use it to emphasize a sunburst. Let's take this one for example. Let's see, where did that one go? So here, And then I'm going to choose one that's just right next to it. And goes farther up here. Sorry about that. I'm going to go back. So we'll just use this one. Okay. So if I reset this and I go ahead and hit my mask, my preset, and I go ahead and I crop her, I'm kind of going through the paces of how I edit. So now I want her on that rule of thirds. So she's on the rule of thirds. I've made sure my building is straight. It's obviously too bright. I'm going to bring the exposure down. You can kind of see her face here, kind of laughing. Radial filter. I'm going to grab that, and I'm just going to do it around the sun. And so now I'm going to bring the exposure down a little bit, and I'm going to warm it up. And then with dehaze, you kind of emphasize the impact of the sun, also with clarity and texture. And so it just gives it a little bump. I'm going to show you. Now, again, hit your backslash button, and it just keeps you in check so you're not doing crazy changes on your images. You're just making it pop. You're making it yours with your changes, but you're not making it crazy. So there you go. Now you can kind of see the joy in her face, and the starburst looks more emphasized. So that is another way you can use the radial filter. So let me make sure I've gotten everything for you. One other thing with the radial, we did the sun inside and outside of the circle. We also did the clouds, and how you can use the linear gradient to, here's a good example, bring back the clouds. So here's before, here's after. I'm going to reset this, and now I'm going to hit it with my preset. It's blue hour. Blue hour is just right after the sun sets, so it's not typically going to be as warm. I still like a little bit warmer feel. Now you can see she's looking kind of red here, so I will go ahead and grab my subject. So I'm going to grab my subject. It's going to highlight her. I'm going to bump up. So if you click these arrows and use your arrow buttons on your keyboard, you can make very subtle adjustments so that it's just easier to manage than the slider. And then I'm going to bump up her highlights a little bit and her shadows. And now it's just affecting my subject. So now her skin looks more normal. I might bump up the white a hair. Okay. So with that, we masked off the subject. Let's show the overlay. It masked her perfectly. Now I'm going to show you the before, after. Now if I zoom in, you can see her skin tone looks really pretty. And it also grabbed her dress and made it pop. So now I'm going to go ahead and crop it. Again, rule of thirds, right at the horizon, and the line right on her. We've grabbed her reflection here, which, remember, a reflection is kind of another subject. So a lot of times if you can include it, you want to include it. So now let's do the linear gradient. Back to masking, grab your linear gradient, pull it down over the sky. Now remember, this is the halfway mark. This is where you don't really want it to affect. So I'm going to bring that down. Now, like I said, it's blue hour, so I kind of want that bluer tint to the sky, although I like her skin warm, so I'm keeping the bottom half warm. So now that it's masked off, I'm going to take the temperature down. Now you can, let's go extreme. Really blue-green. I'm going to bring it up. Let's see. So I kind of like, let's go back to the before. Really blue. So we can do the really blue and keep it that way. And then I use the saturation. And now we can come down here and use the dehaze. That gives the clouds more texture, clarity, texture. It definitely gives more drama to the clouds. So here's a before, here's a after. So we retained some of the pink up here. So before, after. I think it gives this a little bit more cotton candy dreamy feel and still has the blue texture here. A lot of times, now I'm going to give you a bonus here. I will grab a brush, so new mask and a brush, so you can see all the sliders are set to 0 here. I'm going to take my brush, make it bigger. You can make it bigger here too. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to brush over my water here. Careful not to get it on her. And I'm just going to pop the exposure and definitely the clarity and the texture. And again, it just kind of bumps up these bubbles and gives it a little bit more oomph. So here's before, here's after. She's popping. I actually feel like she could be a bit brighter now that we are done. I'm going to click her. You can see the mask. I'm going to bump up her exposure, bring up her shadows. There we go. She kind of blends in here, and now she's popping. So, okay, so we've talked about the linear gradient, the radial gradient, and then I just did a little bit about the masking, how you can mask her off and bring up your subject, and how you made the water pop with the brush. But more importantly, now you know how to use the linear gradient and the radial gradient. Before I go, I will show you with, let's say we're going to do the radial gradient, and let's say we're going to bring it on her, and we're going to, that's too bright, but we're just, for this sake, this is your gradient. You can go in here in the presets and you can name it. Save current settings as a new preset. I can call that bright circle. You can name it whatever you want. But now, okay, let's say I'm done with that picture. Let's say I go to this picture, and let's say I want to use that radial filter. Create new mask. I'm going to use the radial, and I'm going to choose bright circle. It automatically applies this setting. It was just a bump in exposure, but and you can still adjust it. However, you can create a setting with the linear gradient and the radial gradient, and you can have it in your toolbox to use without having to create it every time. So that's just another fun tip. So, okay, that's it for today. Enjoy. I hope you learned something. Go ahead and take a look in the description and see my notes. I am running an online senior photography course. I talk all about capturing high school seniors, college seniors, and creating genuine senior portraits for both young men and young women. I talk about connecting with them, eliciting genuine emotion so that you get emotive imagery. So that link is in the description, and I hope to see you in the course, and I hope to see you back on YouTube. All right, have a great day. Talk to you soon.